Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. It's my pleasure to have you this afternoon. My name is Edward Kopp. I'm the Chief Curator of the Menil Droge Institute in Houston. And our talk this afternoon is the third of a new ongoing series of public programs called On Drawing. Organized by the Menil Droge Institute, these programs address topics ranging from the history, theory, criticism, and materiality of drawing. So leading academics, curators, and experts in the field are invited to participate alongside Menil curators and conservators. And today's program focuses on trends in contemporary drawing and is held in conjunction with Phaidon's recent publication, Vitamin D3, Today's Best in Contemporary Drawing, which is a cutting-edge survey of today's best in contemporary drawing as chosen by a panel of the world's leading art experts. So on this occasion, I'm delighted to be joined by the editor of the publication, Louisa Elderton. Hello, Louisa.
Hi there, Edward.
And Louisa is joining us from Berlin. And so Louisa is project editor for Phaidon's Vitamin series. So in addition to Vitamin D3, she has worked on Vitamin T, Threads and Textiles in Contemporary Art, which was published in 2019, and also Vitamin C, Clay and Ceramic in Contemporary Art, published in 2017. Louisa is also currently curatorial editor at the Gropius Bau in Berlin, and she has worked on books and exhibition texts for Yayoi Kusama, Zanele Muholi, and Li Mingwei, among others. And Louisa finally is also chief editor, of Side Magazine, a publication accompanying the upcoming edition of Bergen Assembly in 2022. I would also like to welcome Dr. Anna Lovat. Hello, Anna.
Hello, Edward. Hi, everyone.
And Anna is joining us from Dallas in Texas. And she is associate professor of art history at Southern Methodist University in Dallas. Research focuses on the roles of drawing and diagramming in art of the 1960s onwards. And particularly, she's an expert in minimal art and conceptual art, as well as land art and video art. And she's the author of Drawing Degree Zero, The Line from Minimal to Conceptual Art, which was published in 2019. And beginning this upcoming February, Anna will be the research fellow at the Menil Droge Institute, and we can't wait to welcome her in person. So for our program today, we'll proceed in the following way. We'll start with an overview of Phaidon's Vitamin D publications, and kindly Louisa will do that for us. And she will share some insight into the selection process of artists and artworks that makes these publications the useful resources that they are. And they are, I should say, useful not just for experts, but also for any drawing enthusiasts. As you know, contemporary drawing is a lively and complex field, so a publication like Vitamin D3 provides welcome points of entry into the field. We will then turn things over to Anna, who will share with us some key trends in contemporary drawing. And then following Anna's presentation, we'll take a close look at some examples of drawings by artists featured in Vitamin D3 that we have recently and acquired at the Menil. And before we begin, I would like to remind our audience members that you can submit your questions at any time by emailing programs@menil.org. We hope to have some time to address a few of these questions towards the end of our conversation. And now, without further ado, I'd like to turn things over to Louisa. Louisa.
Great, thank you so much, Edward. And thank you also to Tony and Lauren and everyone at the Menil Collection for hosting this talk. As Edward has already kindly said, I'm Louisa Elderton and my pronouns are she, her. I should also say that I've recently recovered from COVID-19 and I still have some residual symptoms. So apologies if I cough a little during this talk. So Tony, if we could please bring up the PowerPoint. Great. So I think it's useful to begin by describing what the Vitamin series is and what it aims to do. So each book in this series looks at a medium-specific art practice, be it painting, drawing, ceramic, and so on. And it's essentially a compilation of some of the most interesting, notable, and urgent artists working in a specific medium at the present moment. So it's really about contemporaneity and artists making work in the here and now. So as a freelance arts writer and editor, I began collaborating with Phaidon in 2015 when I wrote a number of the artist texts for Vitamin P3, which was the third in the painting edition. And you can see an image of that in the bottom left of the screen. I subsequently became more involved and began working on the Vitamin series as the project editor in 2016. And I worked closely with Phaidon's amazing commissioning editor, Rebecca Morel, who's really the heart and soul of the Vitamin series in recent years and brings incredible energy and vision to the projects. So as Edward said, together we worked on Vitamin C, which was about clay and ceramic. And you can see the image for that in the top right of the screen. Vitamin T, which was released in 2019, which was about threads, and that's in the bottom middle of the screen. And of course, the book we're talking about today, which is Vitamin D3, today's best in contemporary drawing. Phaidon's also produced other editions in the Vitamin series, including Vitamin 3D, which is about new perspectives in sculpture and installation. And the image for that is in the bottom right of the screen. Next slide, please. So the Vitamin series actually began way back in 2002 with Vitamin P, New Perspectives in Painting. And this was really defined as an illustrated overview of the state of painting in 2002 and documented concerns and ideas about contemporary painters. So it tried to move beyond traditional images associated with the medium to really explore the richness, eclecticism, dynamism, and most importantly, the contemporaneity of painting. The book introduced the series format, and this has really been consistent ever since. So the format includes an introductory essay of approximately 4,000 words, which is written by an expert in the field. And this is followed by a selection of approximately 100 living artists, which is key. And each of these artists have 2 to 4 pages in the book dedicated to their work with an array of images. Generally, we ask for works that are under 5 years old. And there's a newly commissioned 500-word text about their practice, as well as a biography with their place and date of birth and recent group and solo exhibitions. And I'll talk more about how the selection of artists is made for the Vitamin books a little bit later, and it results from a nomination process. So for Vitamin P, this included an essay by Barry Schwabsky, who's an American critic, art writer, and poet. And he asked this very pertinent question, which I would really say went on to define the growth of the series into exploring different media. And so he asked, why, above all today, do we need a book about painting and not simply about art? So he asked why medium specificity matters. And he did so in reference to how fewer and fewer art schools today require students to enroll in specific departments, be it painting, sculpture, printmaking, and so on, instead focusing on whichever technique or medium happens to be the most relevant to a project or idea. And he went on to really dig into the condition of painting in the early 2000s, what he called painting's invitation to direct experience, as well as the multiplicity of different approaches to painting and its openness as a medium. Next slide, please. So looking even further back, the Vitamin series was actually built on Phaidon's book, Cream, Contemporary Art and Culture, which was released in 1998. And this book was compiled by asking an international panel of 10 leading curators to pick 10 artists each. And together this represented 100 rising art stars. So the book really offered an insider's view into the newest art in all media, from painting and sculpture to video, photography, installation, performance, digital media. So it was therefore a survey on current tendencies and personalities at the forefront of contemporary art. So the cream of the crop, hence the book's title. And 10 key contemporary writers wrote texts that addressed pressing issues in art and culture at the end of the millennium. And so the Vitamin series was really a way of further honing this approach to look at medium-specific art practices as a way into really deepening the assessment of tendencies in contemporary art. Next slide, please. So, looking specifically at Vitamin D3, today's best in contemporary drawing, this is the third in the drawing edition. And the first was released in 2005 with an essay by curator Emma Dexter, and the second was released in 2013 with an essay by Christine Rattemeyer. And these included artists very wide-ranging from Francis Alise to Michael Boromans, Wangechi Mutu, David Shrigley, Elizabeth Payton, and many, many more. And one of the rules of the Vitamin series is that no artist is featured more than once across Vitamin D, D2, or D3, but they can feature in a book which is dedicated to another specific medium. So, for example, Ghada Amer was in both Vitamin C, which was about artists working with clay, and Vitamin T, which was about artists working with textiles, because Ghada Amer has both media in her practice. Next slide, please. Vitamin D3 is 303 pages in length. And in terms of the people who were involved in the making of the book, its design and cover image were by Julia Hastings. The typesetting was by Studio Chihade, and it was copy edited by Michaela Parkin. So Rebecca Morrill and I selected 114 living artists to be in the book, and we worked with 23 writers to produce the 500-word interpretive texts for each artist. We also asked approximately 80 nominators from around the world to propose 10 artists each for the book. So in terms of the nomination process, this is a really key aspect of how the Vitamin series is compiled. We ask museum directors, curators, writers, and academics, art experts from around the world to propose artists for the book. And the logic of working with experts on the ground is that they can really speak to the regional specificity of the artists working in their respective parts of the world, which enables the series to have a truly global reach in terms of the research process, and inclusivity and diversity really being at the heart of that approach. So any artist who's nominated 3 times or more is automatically selected for the book. And then Rebecca and I work together to select the rest of the artists in the book based on the names put forward by the nominators. So for Vitamin D3, the nominators included, for example, Christine Marcel, who is the chief curator at the Centre Pompidou in Paris, Zoe Butt, who is the artistic director of the Factory Contemporary Arts Centre in Ho Chi Minh City, and Geeta Kapoor, who is an independent writer and critic in New Delhi, and so on. So this helps the book to appeal to a wide readership, including people from all over the world, from experts in drawing to students, to artists, to professionals working in the art industry like curators, writers, academics. And it's really a book for everyone in the sense that it has such a broad overview of drawing at this moment in time, whilst it also speaks to the history of the medium and really its ever-changing face. Next slide, please. So this is a layout from the main body of the book, and it depicts the pages of Rashid Johnson, who was born in Chicago in 1977 and now lives and works in New York. And the brilliant writer Rahel Aimer wrote the text about Rashid Johnson's work, exploring how his practice originated in conceptual photography, but has since expanded into media, including drawings that often play with racial stereotypes or the generalized tension of being Black in America. In terms of the editorial approach and the writer's brief for the text in the book, as editors, we really emphasized how vitamin D3 is targeted at a broad audience. So it therefore needed to be accessible in terms of its use of language rather than being heavily academic, for example. We asked that the text should be original and interpretive, critically reflecting on the artist's practice when it comes to their use of drawing. We asked that writers describe an impression of what it's like to see 2 or 3 artworks. So in terms of material, color, texture, composition, scale, size, and so on. And also telling the reader why the artist has made these specific pieces and to what effect. We asked writers to explain the experience of being with the works, in what context they were shown and why that may be significant, and whether their use of drawing links to specific historical or social contexts, and if so, why that's significant to the practice. So overall, the 114 artist texts in Vitamin D3 really look at what constitutes drawing currently and the breadth of this definition of what could be drawing and what that could mean for different artists. Next slide, please. This is the book without its dust jacket. So it's a really beautiful purple color, and it also has very vibrant orange end papers. So it's a very colorful design behind the monotone black and white cover. Next slide, please. And perhaps just to mention another book that Rebecca and I have worked on together, Great Women Artists, which was released in 2019. This also speaks to the importance of diversity, which we consider in the Vitamin series, as well as the writing of art history. And this book looks at approximately 500 women artists from the 16th century to the present day, really reconsidering the canon of great women artists and who gets written into history and who is excluded from history, and how that balance can be redressed. Next slide, please. So to look at some of the practices in vitamin D3, which Anna will also go into in more detail, I believe. This slide depicts a work by the British artist Susan Collis, who was born in Edinburgh in 1956. It's titled Remainder, and it's made with pencil on paper, and it's a graphite rubbing of a derelict building. So as you can see, it's comprised of 2 long, wide paper strips that are suspended from ceiling to floor. And up close, the drawing reveals a textured surface with details like brickwork and tiles. So it really gives a sense of both surface, but also the physical presence of a building. Next slide, please. This is by Marco Gianconi, who was born in 1977 in Buenos Aires, and it's titled From the Depth of Time, a work from 2016. And this installation was made with empty recycled plastic bags covered with graphite powder. And there's also a wall drawing, excuse me, of a metal fence made with graphite and a razor. So this was very much a time-based work. The pile of bags was activated by a performer hidden inside who would move it around almost imperceptibly. And likewise, the mural was put together through daily exercises that consisted of sketching and then erasing the image. Next slide, please. So this and the next slide are both by Hannah Quinlan and Rosie Hastings, who both were born in 1991 in the UK. The titles of the works, respectively, are Funny Girls and the Sleepers, both from 2019. And their drawings are wonderful, large-scale figurative works on paper, more often than not, that, excuse me, look not only at the social sphere of queer life, but also the gendered nature of urban architecture and public space, really questioning who is allowed to be where and when. Next slide, please. And finally, this is by Victoria Sin, who was born in 1991 in Toronto. It's called A Weak Female Figure. And it was actually made from makeup on a facial wipe. Victoria Sin uses drag to explore the many possibilities of identity and the artificial nature of gender archetypes, as well as the restrictions placed upon individuals by entrenched systems of really both looking and naming. So that's an introduction to Phaidon's series. I hope you've enjoyed the overview, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Louisa. And now I'd like to invite Anna to join us on the screen. Thank you. Anna, over to you.
Thank you, Edouard, and thank you everybody at the Menil for organising this event. So when Louisa and her co-editor, Rebecca Morel, invited me to write the introductory essay for vitamin D3, it was back in January 2020. And what none of us knew then was that I'd end up writing the essay during lockdown as the COVID-19 pandemic spread across the globe in the spring of that year. And of course, the plight of contemporary artists is far from the greatest tragedy of the pandemic. But I think it's true to say that even if they or their family members did not fall sick, the pandemic still had a dramatic effect on the lives and works of the contemporary artists surveyed in the book. So stay-at-home orders prevented artists from accessing their studios, their workshops, materials, technicians and assistants. Many artists lost work opportunities, including exhibitions, teaching positions, as galleries, museums and universities closed. Artists were also forced to work with the materials they had close to hand. And this prompted many artists better known for their work in other media to turn to drawing, along with, of course, the ubiquitous camera phone. So my essay for vitamin D3 begins with these untitled anxious red drawings that Rashid Johnson produced while he was in lockdown in spring 2020. And these drawings were made in a makeshift workspace in the basement of Johnson's home in New York, using oil stick on cotton rag taped to the wall. And you can see on the left-hand side, Johnson at work on one of the untitled anxious red drawings. And then on the right, these drawings laid out on the floor. So these drawings were shown in a virtual exhibition that included a film of Johnson's son playing the piano as the family's usual activities outside of the home ceased, and they found themselves living, working, and learning in close proximity to one another, something many of us can identify with. So Johnson described this series of drawings as drawings for an anxious time, a time that he said feels simultaneously unsettling, urgent, and radical. Next slide, thank you. And even those of us who are not professional artists turned to drawing during the pandemic. So doodling and colouring were ways to pass the time for many people. And drawings taped to the windows or scratched out on the pavement, as you can see on the left-hand side here, enabled people to communicate with passers-by even when they were confined to their homes. In a particularly poignant series, which you can see here on the right, the trained artist and critical care nurse, Oh Young-jun, used digital drawing to record his experiences working in the ICU in his home city of Daegu in South Korea. The pandemic for many people had the paradoxical effect of contracting the spaces we physically inhabit while increasing our reliance on technologies such as video conferencing, virtual tours, and computer programs like Google Earth in order to connect with distant people and places. So my introductory essay for vitamin D3 focuses on the idea of drawing as a kind of world making, considering the various ways in which contemporary artists have used drawing to shift between the microcosmic and the macrocosmic, conjuring a multiplicity of worlds within worlds and thinking about world making as a way of engaging with our contemporary condition. Now, vitamin D includes over 100 artists, and even in my essay, I was unable to do justice to all of those incredible practitioners. And in this talk, I'm really highlighting just a few select practices, but I hope the audience will be able to see the book and get a fuller picture of the diverse array of contemporary drawings that it encompasses. So on to my theme of my essay, drawing as world making. Several of the artists in Vitamin D3 use drawing to stake out visionary interior worlds, often in response to experiences of suffering and persecution. So I'm thinking here of established figures like Ibrahim El-Salahi and Zarina, who both feature in the book, but also younger artists like Sanu Umar, whose work I'm showing you here. So these mandala-like structures we see in Umar's drawings are rendered with humble materials such as colored pencil, pen, and marker. And he often uses his ID card, things like disposable spoons and metal washers, as stencils for making these drawings. These geometric drawings reference the architectural structures, the tile work and the textiles of his birthplace, Burkina Faso in West Africa, while his portable and ephemeral materials speak of his journey to the United States as an asylum seeker. Umar is working in a long tradition of visionary drawings, including the work of the Swedish artist Hilma af Klint and the Swiss artist Emma Kuntz in the early 20th century. He's described these compositions as a source of spiritual sustenance and even as a means of survival, insisting that, quote, "the reason I'm alive is because of them." And could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So besides crafting these visionary interior worlds, other artists in Vitamin D3 use drawing as a means of visualizing connections with others. Some, including Vernon Arkey, Claudette Johnson, and Barbara Walker, have been picturing marginalized communities for decades, while others envisage alternative models of kinship. And I'm thinking here of the scenes of queer sociality pictured in the work of Hannah Quinlan and Rosie Hastings, which Louisa showed previously. The work of the Nigerian artist Ottobon Nkanga really broadens our understanding of kinship and relatedness to include the kinds of interspecies entanglements now being studied by philosophers and sociologists. Nkanga works in installation, sculpture, tapestry, photography, and performance, but she's emphasized that many of her ideas start with drawings, which she calls the first place that allows the brain to reflect on things. These works in acrylic on paper use the graphic language of collage, also of the chart and the diagram, to make connections between human and non-human organisms, really highlighting the interconnectedness of different forms of life. So this drawing, Flint, features a female figure whose ankles sink into the ground like the roots of a tree. And she's connected to a small child by streams of grey that also seem to emanate from a rock, which we can see in this overlaid image in the lower left. Much of Nkanga's work has dealt with the extraction of resources, and the title Flint here could refer to the mining of quartz, but it also brings to mind the town of Flint, Michigan, whose residents may now suffer the lifelong effects of lead poisoning due to the contamination of their water supply. Like many of Nkanga's works, the drawing connects the extraction and pollution of natural resources with other forms of economic and colonial exploitation. And Nkanga has said that the rootedness of her figures does not necessarily refer to being in a particular place or of a particular nationality, but instead to humankind's relationship with the land. Extending this theme, some of the artists in Vitamin D3, like Abel Rodriguez and Miriam de Burka, use drawing to document and comment on specific localities, while others are more concerned with processes of dislocation and migration. And the Lebanese-Dutch artist Munira Al-Sol began making her drawings of Afghan, Bengali, Somalian, and Ethiopian migrants in 2012, shortly after civil war erupted in Syria. The first drawings were made on notepads, which she purchased in a store in Damascus, in order to draw people who'd escaped from the Palestinian Yarmouk camp after it was besieged by the Syrian army. Al-Sol said that drawing enabled her to record these encounters with refugees in a visceral way, capturing the facial expressions of her subjects without the distancing mechanism of the camera. And while drawing her subjects, Al-Sol also entered into verbal dialogues with them, using the ruled lines of the legal paper to record these conversations, sometimes in Arabic and sometimes in English. Some of the topics are serious and others are more light-hearted. As reflected in the title of the entire series, I strongly believe in our right to be frivolous, which is taken from a poem by the Palestinian writer Mahmoud Darwish. This rapid notational style of Al-Sol's drawings captures these impromptu conversations as they unfold, creating a sense of provisionality and unpredictability that really complements her subject matter. Legal paper also indicates the various bureaucratic procedures that these migrants are subjected to following their arrival in countries across Europe and also in the USA. And finally, my introductory essay for Vitamin D3 explores how contemporary artists are using drawing to visualize our embattled planet, charting geological, meteorological, and astronomical phenomena. So I discuss the work of artists including Tanya Kovacs and Hondartza Fraga, along with the drawings of Emma McNally, which I'm showing you here. McNally has described her immense drawings as a weather system of graphite. And these atmospheric fields conjure processes of vaporization, condensation, turbulence, and drift. Her Coral Field series, number 9 of which I'm showing you here, and number 10 of which is actually on view in the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, are graphite drawings on vast sheets of paper. So this one's about 10 feet wide and 7 feet high. And it has chart-like inscriptions in the top right-hand corner and this dense smoke-like rubbing billowing diagonally from the lower right towards the upper left. So in these drawings, graphite is ruled, sometimes hammered, and sometimes scratched onto the paper, and occasionally applied with one hand and rubbed away with the other. The title Choral Fields relates to music, but also to philosophical ideas such as the chora, a space or place in which forms materialize. So the world fashioned in these drawings is as much a conceptual space and a space of relationality as it is a physical space. Since her inclusion in Vitamin D3, McNally has exhibited in a decommissioned military testing site on the island of Orford Ness in Suffolk in the UK as part of a project by the British organisation Art Angel. And here I'm showing you a river that flows nowhere, like a sea, which is a 30-foot long graphite drawing made for the Armoury building at Orford Ness, which was once used to house elements of the atomic weapons research establishment. Like her Choral Field series, this work links the atomic and the atmospheric. These circular inscriptions, which you can see in this inset on the right, diagramming phenomena of indeterminate scale, so that they can conjure either subatomic particles or entire solar systems. I think this work seems like a fitting place to end my discussion of drawing as a form of world making, which is further explored in my introduction to Vitamin D3.
Thank you so much, Anna, for these very perceptive thoughts and remarks. And now I'd like to share some examples that we recently acquired at the Menil, works by artists all featured in Vitamin D3. So if I could have the slide, thank you. So first, an example by Rashid Johnson, as was previously mentioned. He is an artist frequently engaging questions of shared and personal histories, particularly around class and race. Is perhaps best described as being in the lineage of conceptual art. His multidisciplinary practice ranges from photography to video to performance and architecture, and more recently to drawing. And the Menil recently acquired Untitled Unctuous Red Drawings, which is a diptych that Johnson made in 2020 with oil sticks on 2 sheets of cotton rag paper. And during the pandemic, the artist temporarily moved his studio outside of New York to his house, and without the ability to produce works with in a larger scale that required a team of people, Johnson sought to work in a more isolated, visceral, but also more tactile way. And as he stated in an essay directly addressing this new series, he said, "All I need was paper and oil sticks in vivid red, which I associate with urgency, blood, and alarm." And so, working directly with the producer of art materials, Johnson actually commissioned this particular hue and viscosity of the material, and then made a series with it. And this particular work is the largest of the group and the only one in a diptych format. And when making such a drawing, Johnson begins the composition in the upper left corner by making a square, and then by filling that square with scrolling and jagged lines that suggest a face. And then he proceeds in this way across the entirety of the sheet, building a grid formation that he renders illegible gradually as each face traverses the boundary of the delineated square. So when looking at to work like this up close, next slide please, the surface reveals a thickness and a complexity of line that is really particular to the oil stick technique. And by virtue of this medium, each vigorous broad line is effectively made of multiple smaller lines in a variety of red hues. And I should add that this is really something that you see when you are physically in front of the work, but you have to take my word for it. Because each new line is thick, because it obscures what lies beneath, the artist is really gradually building up the picture and a sense of space alongside it. In 2015, Johnson had debuted 2 related series of works, Anxious Audience and Anxious Man, which he loosely identifies as self-portraits. And they were his personal response to the growing political violence towards Black Americans that frequently appeared in the news. These works also serve as his first significant foray into the drawing medium. And interestingly, however, these works were made on pieces of white tile coated in a mixture of black soap and wax, which where then Johnson really made scratches and digs and erasures into the surface to define the action of drawing. So his Untitled Unctuous Red Drawing finds resonance with other contemporary artists. For example, with Glenn Ligon, who I'm showing you an example here at left, entitled How Does It Feel to Be White Hue from '91. And both artists, if you think of it, employ oil wax as their medium of choice, and also both use a regimented approach to the medium. In Ligon's case, oil stick is pressed through the stenciled letters that eventually become illegible on the sheet of paper, while for Johnson, the energetic and rapidly produced grid lines do not remain distinct as a minimal formation. And also have to mention possible resonances with the work of Cy Twombly, and I'm showing you an example here at right, Twombly being a stalwart of the drawing collection here at the Menil, and an artist who also evoked the body and the bodily in primordial and abstract ways. So next, I'd like to take a look at Chicago-based artist Tony Lewis, who is known for his sparse yet expansive drawing practice, which explores systems of language as material to address social and political topics such as race, power, communication, and labor. Lewis's practice emphasizes the body through scale, tension, and imprint. He works in a very spatial way, usually with large amounts of graphite powder, a material that is very hard to control and so invasive that it inherently questions the very boundaries of drawing. The drawing you see here is titled Blue. It's from 2017 and it was recently acquired by the Menil. And Blue is part of a group of drawing that Lewis made using an old dictionary of shorthand notations called, invented by a man called John Robert Gregg in 1888. And it was a naturalistic kind of shorthand that quickly rose to great popularity in the early 1900s. And like other shorthand methods, the great shorthand method uses a set of line forms that correspond to spoken words. And so when Lewis discovered a copy of the Gregg dictionary in a thrift store in Cleveland, he was instantly struck by the fluid, expressive scrolls, and so really an opportunity to form a new relationship with language. And as he put it, this allowed him, I quote, to keep the foundation of language as a principle for making a drawing, end quote. And so this drawing, with its strong physical presence, subtle textural complexity, and a wide array of effects achieved with the graphite, this drawing is really an excellent example of the artist's work. And Lewis's engagement with powder graphite in space has led him to create a series of enormous floor drawings, of which you see an example folded in the foreground in the image at left. And once these very large floor drawings are no longer in view, they can be folded up until a new opportunity arises to display them again in a new way. And so each time such a piece is reinstalled, it gets inevitably damaged due to the sheer size and weight of the piece, and therefore becomes a different work in the new space that it inhabits. Another kind of drawing for which Lewis has become known are language-based works, such as the one in the image at right, which is an example of works that feature text culled from a variety of sources, including his personal writings and political vocabularies. In some cases, Lewis generates the words through automatic writing, associative word games, or drawing exercises. In this particular example, he played with and started to deconstruct the phrase, the people of Colorado, and try to see where it would lead him. And of course, when you first look at the drawing, the first thing you read is people of color. In 2017, Lewis created a monumental site-specific mural titled Plunder for the Rose Museum at Brandeis University. And to install this work, he used thousands of rubber bands dipped in graphite powder and stretched them on screws to generate a line drawing. It is not a random cursive motif. Instead, it signifies the word plunder in the shorthand system that I just mentioned. Also included in Vitamin D3, Zarina, the Indian-born Muslim-American printmaker and sculptor who passed away last year. She had an intimate approach to abstraction that was firmly rooted in the material, expressive, and historical qualities of paper. She often compared paper to a second skin. As a young woman, she saw a family separated during the partition of India, an event that would ground visual interrogations of home and placelessness. She repeatedly depicted maps and borders as a way to symbolically undo divisions. So the woodcut you see here on the screen is titled Abyss. It's from 2013, and it's based on the arbitrary dividing line between India and Pakistan, one of the tensest borders in the world, as you know. And this sensibility only grew in her as an adult after she married a diplomat, and then she moved frequently around Europe with interludes in India. And for Zarina, the vulnerability and transportability of paper made it a natural medium to pose such questions. Her work is also informed by her early architectural studies, Urdu poetry, and minimalist sensibilities. And next slide, yes. And so Zarina, this is a sculpture from 2011, also in the Menil collection, which is made of gold leaf on bamboo blinds, and it really attests to Zarina's sensitive and exquisite approach to materials and textures. Zarina arrived in New York in the early 1970s at the height of post-minimal abstraction, and after she had begun experimenting with abstract monochrome work, when she first arrived in Paris in a decade before, her work resonated with the art community she found in her new home. And New York proved to be a very exciting but also a lonely place for the artist. She had moved there without her husband, whom she was separated from, but also with no contacts in the city. And in 1979, Zarina's husband passed away, which deepened her sense of isolation. And the drawing you see on the screen was made in that year. And as she wrote in her 2018 book, Directions to My House, I quote, "I felt eaten away. I took a needle to paper and pierced it repeatedly. For months, I stayed at home, made my pen drawings, and thought about my life," end quote. And here I'm showing you the lower part of the drawing, and you can see how it's made by aperture alone. So Zarina used a laminated sheet of paper for the work, a process that strengthens the paper and prepares it for the needle. And crucially, Zarina alternately pierced the paper from the front and the back, and did so from a variety of angles, thereby creating a subtle yet complex patterning system, a kind of landscape, if you will, across the sheet of raised and recessed punctures. Zarina was deeply influenced by the art of Eva Hesse after seeing a memorial exhibition of her work, and indeed this drawing shares deep affinities with the slow and meditative quality of Hesse's drawings, as exemplified in the drawing at right. And so I'd like to end here, and now I'd like to invite Louisa and Anna to join me again on the screen. Louisa, Anna, thank you again so much for your presentations and your thoughts on the current state of drawing. And I thought that to start the conversation, I would start with an issue raised by Zarina's art, namely how drawing can help retrieve or create a sense of home when someone goes through the experience of migration, whether that migration is voluntary or forced. And Anna, you've mentioned the example of Munira Al-Sol, and you may know, and Louisa too, of other examples of contemporary draftspeople focusing on migrant experience. But I was going to ask you, what do you think makes drawing such a valid and current medium in a particular, in the case of migration, and also what graphic strategies do artists use to come to terms with the difficulties of that experience?
Shall I go first? Yes. So I think with Sanu Umar and Munira Al-Sol, both of whom I mentioned, the portability and accessibility of materials is really important. So Munira Al-Sol has spoken about buying those yellow pads in Damascus in order to make these drawings of refugees emerging from a camp. So there's a certain sense of that are close to hand, but that also can be easily transported and lend themselves to these very precarious situations. I can think of another example in Vitamin D3, which is Miriam Kalm's Mare Nostrum drawing, which is a much more finished drawing based on Henry Moore's drawings made in the London Underground during World War II. But instead of the London Underground, it's actually a Mediterranean beach with refugees lying on the shore. And Mare Nostrum refers to the Mediterranean Sea. So that's a different type of drawing referring to the migrant crisis, but not necessarily made in this rapid and provisional way.
Yeah, I think I would also further add to that what you said, Edouard, about Zarina's practice towards the end there with her quote. It was so evocative in terms of how drawing can really speak to both place, but also placelessness, and a placelessness emotionally, perhaps. The fact that she was using a pin and piercing paper in order to reflect this sense of internal emotional pain and absence and sort of loss. And I think drawing can speak to the immediacy of that sort of internal emotional state when going through a sense of perhaps movement or migration or placelessness. Yeah.
Yes, quite. And also in our case, there's, obviously by making a hole, you signify a void. And so, in the certainly biographical terms, it seems that, there was a big loss of her husband. I'm not sure I want to reduce it to that, but I think also for her paper is so crucial as a place where a place to sense, a place to create, and a place where she can feel at home. And I think absolutely paper is something that she can carry with her, and where she can retrieve herself in a way, and retrieve that sense of home. I was going to ask you both a question about the particular conditions we're in, and I know that Anna, you've mentioned that a little bit, and namely about the COVID-19 pandemic. And I understand that your introduction, Anna, was really written as we were just going into lockdown. Now we have more benefit of hindsight. We understand that the period has been actually quite productive for many draftspeople. And so I just wanted to ask you if you could, the two of you, try and sort of unpack a little bit why this period has been so productive, and how it has helped artists to cope with the difficulties of the period.
Yes, I mean, I think restriction can be quite productive. And obviously, as someone who writes on minimal and conceptual art, so many of those artists were setting up these restrictive systems within which to work. So I think being restricted to a limited set of materials, even to a particular space, and focusing on a single body of work can ultimately be productive, as well as, of course, frustrating. And many of us are relieved as things are beginning to open up. But I think that sort of focus has been helpful for artists.
Mm. Yeah, I've spoken to so many artists who describe the difficulties of the lockdown and the pandemics, but also about how it really stopped them from traveling and focused them in on their local geography. And an artist who we showed this year at the Gropiusbau, Cheng Bo, who traveled all of the time for his practice, he began to really sort of just take walks around his home on Lantau Island in Hong Kong. And he walked up a hill every day and into the local jungle and just took a pencil and a paper and drew the local plant life. And so one of the large-scale installations that spread across 3 of the rooms at Gropiusbau were 366 drawings that he produced daily during that lockdown period, which of course is a work which speaks to the specificity of the COVID-19 lockdown, not being able to move and having to really look locally and kind of hone in on plant life locally. So I think that's an interesting example of this very rich work that came out of that period.
Thank you. And let me take some questions from the audience. And there's first question. You spoke a little of how the immediacy of drawing is well suited for this particular moment. Can you talk more about this as a trend? And perhaps if there are other artists that come to mind who may have turned to drawing at this time, who maybe aren't typically associated with this medium? Anna, Louisa?
Yeah, I would maybe mention a British artist called Rebecca Ackroyd, who had a wonderful show in Berlin at Perez Projects this year. Normally works with painting and sculpture primarily, but lots of drawing in this show. And one of the bodies of work in the show was actually drawings from her dreams in comic book style strips. So her work often engages with feminist themes around the body and identity. But I found this particular comic strip series of drawings very evocative and really speaks to how drawing can both sort of document and reflect the world that we live in, but also the imagined world and the dreamed world, spaces that don't necessarily exist, experiences that haven't necessarily happened to us, but that exist in another realm and can be kind of concretized through drawing. Yeah.
Yes, I think this is something that, yes, and that we've not only seen artists who are known for works in other mediums turn to drawing, but also artists sort of develop their drawing practice into something that wasn't previously. So the last Emma McNally drawing I showed at Orford Ness was something that really came out of the research and reading she'd been doing during the pandemic, and it was even more expansive, more three-dimensional than the Choral Fields. So I think we've seen people's drawing practices evolve through this period of introspection and focus into something that they weren't previously, as well as new types of drawing coming out of artists who are perhaps not working in that medium before.
Thank you. And another question from the audience. When talking about drawing during my art education, drawing was defined and seen in many different ways. One of the things that I've been told is that I'm drawing in paint, sometimes something which puts the primacy of line as, makes it central. Drawing is also seen as preparatory, as well as a kind like a painting. How do you see these different strands of drawing interact and interrupt themselves today?
Yes, in the essay, I talk a little bit about the different ways in which drawing has been defined, and many institutions still define drawing in terms of materials. So often works on paper and then listing graphite, charcoal, but also a whole range of other materials. Whereas other scholars, such as Cornelia Butler and Catherine de Zager, have defined drawing more in terms of line. So it could take any material form, but linearity is central. And yet then in the book, and Louisa showed the work of Susan Collis and Marco Gianconi, we have work that is actually not that linear. It's sort of very volumetric in many ways, and yet is using conventional drawing materials like graphite. So I tend to think of it as a set of overlapping conventions that includes materials and also includes linearity, but that doesn't necessarily have to be reduced to either one or the other. I'd be interested to know, Edouard, whether the Menil has a specific definition that you use when you're collecting drawings with the Institute, if it's material-based or sort of more expansive than that.
It's more expensive. So the crux of our collection would fall fairly squarely within a traditional definition of what drawing is. As you mentioned, the one from MoMA, but we collect. We're very interested in unusual materials, unusual supports. I think we'll look at also if the opportunity arises to acquire drawings. On the video supports, I think this is something that we would certainly consider. So we have this expansive notion, certainly at the Institute as a forum for this discussion of what drawing is, what it can be, what it has been. We refuse to stick to one definition, because otherwise it might, in a way, constrict the very thing we're trying to generate a dialogue around. So we're looking at all kinds of definition. But when I read your essay, Anna, I was quite intrigued by how you were looking at different ways or different areas of definition for drawing. And one of them was you were interested in the somatic aspect of drawing. And I don't know if you could tell us a little more about that. So you talk about materials, you talked about line and relationality in the medium, but what about the somatic dimension?
Yes, I think these different kinds of mark making, that came across really strongly when you were showing the close-up of the Rashid Johnson anxious red drawing, the way in which the paint stick in that case creates this extremely thick sort of impasto surface. And yet we also might often think of drawing in terms of a kind of friction, the tooth of the paper and the graphite actually being abraded or rubbed on that surface, and the bodily actions involved in that process of dragging across a surface. So yes, I think these bodily actions also can become quite expansive and varied. So digital drawing obviously involves very different bodily movements and engagements with materials and technology. But yes, I think this somatic aspect is something I'd really like to emphasize, the way in which these drawings were produced through bodily movements.
Thank you. And sadly, our time is coming to a close. And so I would like to thank you, Anna, and you, Louisa, very much for participating and for sharing your thoughts on contemporary drawing. I would also like to point out that copies of Vitamin D3 may be purchased through the Menil Collection bookstore. And for those tuning in from Houston, a reminder that we have 2 exhibitions on view at the Drawing Institute at the moment. One is titled Spatial Awareness, Drawings from the Permanent Collection, and the other, Draw Like a Machine, Pop Art 1952 to 1975. And they will be on view at the Institute through March 13th. And then in January, New York-based artist Kate Shepard will be joining us at the Drawing Institute for an artist talk. And please visit the Menil's website, menil.org, to learn more about our exhibitions and public program offerings. And so again, thank you both very much, and also thank you to our audience, and we look forward to seeing you soon.